Well, I was going to tell you that it's the 30th anniversary of the Weinman lecture, but this did a much more beautiful job than I can. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sarah Bloomfield and have the honor of being the director of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. You saw here in this presentation back in 1995, the museum was just 2 years old when we launched this important series. As you saw, we hosted the esteemed Dr. Jeffrey Hartman of Yale to deliver the inaugural lecture. And I went back and reflected on what he said that night. He reminded us of the irreplaceable value of Holocaust testimony and the survivors who impart it. He said, quote, "An important reason for oral testimonies of the Holocaust is to allow survivors to speak for themselves. We should not speak for them. Rather, we have a duty to listen." And indeed we do. And we can never forget that those who did not survive are voiceless, but to the extent that anyone can speak for them, it is, of course, the survivors. Continuing Dr. Hartman's tradition tonight, we have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Hannah Pollin-Galay from UMass Amherst. And in her work, she too pays tribute to the power of survivor testimonies in order to help people all over the world understand the Holocaust at a human level, a much more deeply human level. 3 decades after launching this series, we find ourselves in a very different and troubling world, experiencing unprecedented levels of anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, and distortion, all exacerbated by the decline in historical literacy and the decline in civics education, the impact of social media, and the constant assaults against truth. In this world, the unique power of authenticity is more important than ever, and it's more relevant to the audiences we must reach. Over the past 20 months, our social media videos featuring Holocaust survivors talking about anti-Semitism have had 840 million views, 83% of them by teenagers. Dr. Janice Weinman-Shorenstein and her family recognized the significance of the museum's work early on when she so generously endowed this lecture in 1995 as a tribute to her parents and, of course, to all Holocaust survivors. We're delighted to have Janice and her husband Stuart with us tonight, and it's my pleasure now to invite Janice to say a few words.
Good evening, everybody. It was in 1995, after both of my parents had passed away, that I decided that the greatest gift I could make in commemoration of their lives was to launch the first lecture series at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in their honor. It was also a small part in our recognizing the other families who had immigrated to America to find peace, dignity, and democracy. This is the lecture's 30th anniversary, as you've noted, and over the past 3 decades that we have held this series, we have heard from authors and journalists, from theologians, and above all, from scholars. Thanks to the support of the museum's incredible staff under the leadership of Sarah Bloomfield, we have told many stories of survivors, of the lives they lived during and after the Holocaust, of the travails, hopes, dreams that took place, and most of all, of the impact that the Holocaust had, both when it happened and since the time it ended. But the most stunning part of the narrative that we have shared over the years is the current resurgence of the anti-Semitism that defined the Holocaust and that is recurring in all parts of the world. When we came to America, my father told me over and over again not to take freedom for granted. Today, we are fighting to maintain what we thought we had immigrated to and what we believed was the way in which we would live our lives. This year's lecture may not be the top of mind topic as we continue to fight anti-Semitism, but it captures the role of Yiddish not only as a language, but in maintaining a culture, in allowing for easy communication, in remembering a way of life that meant so much to the Jews who lived through the Holocaust. For language represents a key mechanism in the survival that continues to pervade our past and our current history. During the lecture this year, you will learn about the way this language allowed Jews to experience community through the expressions that they shared, through the feelings that the language embodied, and through the connective tissue that language provided for Jews throughout Europe and those who immigrated to America after the war. The hallmark of this institution is to ensure the endurance of our rich past and raise public awareness of what we had lost and what we need to continually honor. The Yiddish language is one small part of our heritage, and I am so grateful to Professor Hannah Pollin-Galay for her scholarship, her documentation, and her advocacy of Yiddish. No longer do we sing the Yiddish songs that so deeply filled us with pathos. No longer do we speak the language which singularly captured our traditions and customs that are so fragile today. Not just because of the explosive and excruciating rise of anti-Semitism, but because of the assimilation that time has created. Tonight, on our 30th anniversary, we celebrate a language that embodies and captures the richness of our past and the narrative that we need to preserve in order to retain our identity and our unity. For as my dear friend, Dr. Heidi Ramirez notes, quote, "Our heritage languages represent and sustain our rich cultures, family histories, and community values, while allowing us to authentically express our diverse points of view, negotiate meaning, feed our souls, and maintain ties across miles and generations, creating the unique fabric that is ours." Thank you again to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum that has made this a home for my ability to honor my parents, and to all of you who have and continue to attend these lectures over the past many years. I hope that they have informed and enriched your life as they have mine, and that they have motivated you to never forget. Thank you.
Janice, thank you so much for those moving words. Your introductions over the years have been just absolutely a beautiful part of this series. Good evening, everyone, again, and welcome also from me. My name is Lisa Leff, and I'm the director of the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies here at the museum. Our center aims to advance the field of Holocaust studies by helping scholars from around the world to do their research and to disseminate their research to the world. And this lecture is an important part of that mission. And it's also been an amazing window to look through to see the growth of the field over the past 30 years. In preparation for this landmark 30th anniversary, we went back and asked former speakers in this series to reflect upon the ways in which Holocaust studies has changed over the past 30 years. And I want to share with you some of the insights that we got back from these speakers. So one former speaker was Dr. Monna Afridi from Manhattan University. She delivered this lecture in 2016, and she wrote to us that, yes, our field faces many challenges today, but, and I'm quoting her now, these obstacles have also created unprecedented opportunities for dialogue and understanding. The field has grappled with rising anti-Semitism, digital disinformation, and the challenge of educating teachers who lack robust foundations in this complex history. Monna further reflected that Holocaust studies has opened new pathways for scholarship. We've seen the field expand beyond its European-centered origins to embrace transnational perspectives, interdisciplinary approaches, and crucially, interfaith dialogue. Another past speaker, Dr. Sarah Horowitz from York University, was the featured scholar here in 2014, and then she came back and served as a moderator in 2021 in one of our online programs. Sarah echoed Monna Afridi's sentiments and added that, and I'm quoting her here, "We bring our thinking about the Holocaust into conversations with colleagues and students and communities who work on and are interested in other things, and they learn from us. We learn from them. Our knowledge, our understanding becomes enriched, and our questions become more complicated, more pressing." Another former Weinman lecturer is Dr. Norm Goda from the University of Florida. Dr. Goda spoke on this podium in 2015, and he wrote to us about the ways in which events on the world stage create profoundly different interpretations of the contemporary meaning of the Holocaust. He wrote, "It will take time, in fact, years, to figure out the meaning of the fissures that are emerging in Holocaust studies today and the ways that we can mend them." However, like Dr. Afridi, Dr. Goda sees hope and opportunity in the future. He highlighted that the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and its wonderful supporters have built one of the world's great research and scholarly enterprises. I'm sure that the study of the Holocaust and the situating of its history within the contemporary setting will be in capable hands. Dr. Henry Greenspan from the University of Michigan delivered this lecture 25 years ago. And when he wrote to us about the state of the field, he said that survivor voices, then as now, remain precious, rare. They're critical ambassadors for the power and importance of this history. As he wrote, "It's all about relationships. My beloved survivor friend Augie Rubin said, 'Whatever I think I'm teaching, I'm learning at the same time. We're learning together.' Beyond exhibits, beyond lectures, beyond research, museums are at their best and they're most memorable when they facilitate learning together." And so it is with Dr. Greenspan's generous invitation to learn together that I want to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Hannah Pollin-Galay. Dr. Pollin-Galay is the newly appointed Penn Tishkach Chair of Holocaust Studies and Director of the Institute for Holocaust, Genocide, and Memory Studies at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Prior to taking on this position, she served as the head of the Yonah Goldrich Institute for Yiddish Language, Literature, and Culture at Tel Aviv University. She's the author of several books and articles, including the monograph Occupied Words, What the Holocaust Did to Yiddish, winner of the 2024 National Jewish Book Award in the Holocaust category. Dr. Pollin-Galay is no stranger to this institution. She also held the Phyllis Greenberg Heidemann and Richard D. Heidemann Fellowship here in the Mandel Center in 2015. Following her lecture tonight, I will moderate a brief discussion with Dr. Pollin-Galay right over here. If you have a question that comes to you during the lecture, write it down on the index card you were given when you came in and pass it to the edge. We have staff members who can take it and bring it up to me. And then I will ask them in our Q&A session. And then after the session is over, I invite you upstairs for our special reception. And now please join me in welcoming Dr. Hannah Pollin-Galay to the stage for the 30th anniversary of our Weinman annual lecture entitled The Vocabulary of Holocaust Victimhood, Small Words, Big Questions.
What an honor to be here. Thank you so much to the Weinman Shorenstein family, and thank you to the museum for inviting me. While I was watching the slideshow going back over the past 30 years of this lecture, I actually had to lower my eyes. It was so moving. And I'm also especially honored that there are a whole group of UMass alums joining us this evening, which is really exciting. I'm really happy to have that as my new academic home. And so let's begin. In June 1945, an emaciated man named Yisrael Kaplan stood before an audience of other ailing survivors and refugees at the Shabreven hospital in Munich and delivered an ambitious speech in Yiddish entitled The Transformation of Our Folk Creativity, Unser Volksschaffen in Gewandel. With a swollen, bandaged head, Kaplan embarked on a sweeping overview of the history of folk creativity, culture from below, moving through the contributions of Jewish cantors and wedding performers all the way to modern writers of the 20th century. Having unfurled hundreds of years of cultural developments, Kaplan crowned his speech in this hospital with a rallying cry to his audience of convalescent survivors and refugees. People can bear witness. Help save our inheritance. What, you might ask, was the nature of this valuable inheritance that Kaplan was so urgently calling on all to preserve and elevate for future generations? In his lecture notes, Kaplan exemplifies what he meant by Holocaust folk creativity with a list of Yiddish neologisms coined in the camps and ghettos, with no written definitions. Klepsy, which meant theft, probably drawn from the Greek root klepto. Affenskoverode, from Auschwitz, that meant to the crematoria, which was the phrase, the combination of Yiddish and Polish. Yazdin koimin, driving to the chimney, the verb in Polish, the noun in Yiddish. Musulman, which you've probably heard of, an emaciated prisoner. Vitamin, which literally means vitamin, but in the Holocaust context meant special protection. Mutfru, which meant beef and horse flesh, respectively, imitating animal calls. Knepelach, literally buttons, but here golden coins. And yushnik, literally pig feed, but was the name of a soup in some camps. This motley, disturbing cluster of semi-obscenities, lingual hybrids, crude metaphors, and automatopoeias were, to Kaplan's mind, a treasure that required urgent documentation and illumination. Following this brief list, which seems to have been a part of his lecture, Kaplan's notebook turns into his first draft of a dictionary, 43 pages long, tightly packed with roughly 760 terms of the same sort. Kaplan would begin publishing these terms with full glosses included 1 year later under the title Das Volksmäul in Nazi-Klemm, The People's Mouth Under the Nazi Yoke, as a serial column in the journal that he founded and edited called Von letzten Hurban, from the last catastrophe. And later he republished his dictionary in 1949 in book form to much acclaim. Probably there are some people in this audience who are thinking right now, why on earth would someone find it urgent, in the wake of collective catastrophe and personal near-death experiences, someone who has barely recovered his most basic bodily functions, why would he find it urgent to write a dictionary? And a dictionary of such strange, painful argot at that. This would seem to be an especially bewildering choice of words to preserve in the case of Yiddish, given its fragile state at this point in history. Among the many languages spoken during the Holocaust, more than 40 at least, Yiddish stands out in the severity of the blow that it suffered. Linguist Neil Jacobs estimates that the Holocaust took the lives of roughly 5 million Yiddish speakers out of 11 million living worldwide before the war. And of the approximately 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust, roughly 85% were Yiddish speakers. That doesn't mean they were solely Yiddish speakers, that meant that they spoke Yiddish, among other languages. Beyond this tremendous loss in the number of living Yiddish speakers, the Holocaust also destroyed most of the East European Jewish communities in which Yiddish was spoken, and therefore where Yiddish literature and culture would have been created and thrived into the future in years to come. So given the precarious state of the Yiddish language after the Holocaust, why would Kaplan invest special time and energy in propagating Hurban Yiddish, that is, Yiddish of the Holocaust, with all of its vulgarities and oddities? Wouldn't he want to run a PR campaign about how literary and intelligent and clean the Yiddish language was? As strange as it sounds, Kaplan was not the only one to choose to work on a dictionary of Hurban Yiddish, Holocaust Yiddish, at this post-war moment. A Polish Jewish cultural activist from Lublin named Nachman Blumenthal, who had survived the war years in the unoccupied Soviet Union, started researching and gathering Hurban Yiddish words almost immediately upon his return to Poland in 1944. His work would be published as a serial dictionary between 1956 and 64, and then reprinted as a book in 1981. And throughout all of those decades, he continued to collect Yiddish neologisms, reaching over 3,000 by the time he published in 1981. Yes, 3,000 words in the Yiddish language that were either added or redefined drastically during the Holocaust period. And working separately from Kaplan and Blumenthal, the Soviet linguist Elie Spivak published yet another glossary of this sort in 1946. And even during the war, during the Holocaust, people were actually taking note of these changes in the Yiddish language in real time. There were 2 different efforts in the Warsaw Ghetto to create these lists. This is one of them by Rabbi Shimon Huberband. And in the Łódź Ghetto, the Encyclopedia of the Ghetto Lodge contained entries about new Yiddish words, and actually the planned entries that they didn't get to complete included quite a number of plans to document new Yiddish words. Why? Why were so many Holocaust victims, survivors, and Jewish contemporaries so committed to studying and uplifting Yiddish neologisms of the Holocaust? The young survivor author from Łódź, Chava Rosenfarb, provided a fascinating answer to this question of why. Why Hurban Yiddish? Why Holocaust Yiddish? She, like many others, chose to preserve and explore Hurban Yiddish words not through lexicography, but through art, incorporating many historically accurate Holocaust neologisms into her poetry and her fiction, both during and after the war. She explained why these words were so important to her worldview, her own spiritual survival, in the introduction to her very first book of poetry, which she published in 1947 in Yiddish at the age of 23, while recovering in Belgium from nearly fatal typhus. Ambitiously, Rosenfarb addressed this book of Yiddish poems not only to her fellow East European Jewish survivors, as one might expect, but also to, quote, "you from other nations, and you, our own brothers, who were far from us in those harrowing years. I just love this, that a 23-year-old survivor who's writing in Yiddish is already picturing this audience today in 2025, that people from all over the world and all different backgrounds are going to pay attention to what she has to say. If only we all had that vision and confidence, right? I just love that. Every time I read it, I get goosebumps. She intended her message for both Jews and non-Jews, and then she offered all of them a rebuke. Instead of lifting us, survivors, into their arms, the world is leaving our holy remains to rot on the trash cans of Germany. She was angry and disappointed. But Rosenfarb does not then turn to retribution or dwell in her bitterness, but moves on to propose a way to overcome this apathy around her and to let survivors share in the responsibility of overcoming apathy. She writes, "It has become clear to me that we, the survivors, we have a holy mission. We need to teach people how to love." What could love, a word that I take to mean empathy, a commitment to peace, solidarity, and equality, mean in this post-Holocaust context? What does love mean when we bring it up in a scholarly context today? Rosenfarb does not discuss generalities of this value, but rather starts to flesh out her concept of love by turning to Hurban Yiddish words. Many ghetto words, which ought to become symbols, must first be explained and made familiar, becoming a shared estate for us all. That is, new words from ghettos and camps like klepsi and mutfru should be studied by all and somehow form the basis for a new cultural commons with the gates open to all. How can we understand this paradoxical connection that Rosenfarb makes in articulating a moral response to the Holocaust? On the one hand, to teach the transcendent value of love, but on the other, to teach love by teaching the most particular, singular phenomenon of ghetto and camp Yiddish. Though Rosenfarb wrote this in 1946, I somehow feel that she was speaking to us today in 2025 when she articulated this dual challenge. I believe I am not alone in sensing that we are living through a highly fraught moment when it comes to Holocaust memory and consciousness today. Dr. Leff's comments about previous speakers reflected the same sense of where we are now. Here's how I see it. On the one hand, the Holocaust seems more present than ever. Holocaust comparisons and references permeate political discourse and social media on a seemingly daily basis, minute-by-minute basis would maybe be more accurate. And Holocaust comparisons are used in the service of political opinions from across the spectrum. Taken as a whole, these comparisons create the feeling that today we can only judge, denounce, or raise awareness around current events if they are discussed in relation to the Holocaust. Alongside this seeming hyper-presence of the Holocaust in contemporary political life, public literacy about the concrete events of Holocaust history, as opposed to the Holocaust as a loose symbol, concrete knowledge is currently at a low. In a 2020 survey of Americans under the age of 40, 63% did not know that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, with over half believing that the death toll was less than 2 million. And nearly half of those surveyed could not name a single concentration camp or ghetto. I would love to believe that this survey displayed merely a decline in knowledge of nitpicky facts or statistics, but that empathy and curiosity about human narratives of the Holocaust were still strong. Sadly, I'm not sure that this is the case. In December of 2023, a middle school in the Boston area canceled a planned presentation by a local Holocaust survivor, Khanele, stating only that some teachers and parents were, quote, uncomfortable with her speaking at that time in the school. A similar cancellation occurred at the University of Utrecht in January of 2024. In both of these cases, thankfully, the Holocaust lectures were rescheduled after public protest. Still, we should take note that in the current climate, there was a strong impulse to cancel them. It seems then that continual Holocaust comparisons, such as we see in popular culture and politics today, do not guarantee interest in learning about the events of the Nazi genocide, nor in the people murdered as a result of it. And yet, I cannot, in good conscience, simply denounce all attempts to compare contemporary events to the Holocaust. Importantly, psychologists hold that social comparisons are an innate part of personal human development. If that's true on an individual psychological scale, it's only logical that comparisons are also vital on a collective scale, setting up bars of social judgment across time and space, knowing where we are on an ethical level. One might also argue that during the Holocaust, at least some inmates were making comparisons in real time. In 1942, for instance, Hermann Kruk, head of the Vilna Ghetto Library, lamented the fact that only a minority of those who came to the library chose to read books about historical parallels, like Franz Werfel's novel about the Armenian genocide. Kruk thought Vilna ghetto inmates should be seeking more comparisons to the events that they were experiencing in the flesh, not less. Moreover, some of the greatest moral voices of American history have made comparisons to the Holocaust, not in the spirit of competing or erasing that history, but as an act of solidarity. In 1958, for example, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. warned, quote, as the tensions and bewilderment of economic problems become more severe, history's scapegoats, the Jews, will be joined by new scapegoats, the Negroes. The Hitlers will divert people's minds and turn their frustration and anger to the helpless, to the outnumbered. A wholly, completely anti-comparatist stance to Holocaust history would erase voices like Hermann Kruk's and Martin Luther King's. So where does this leave us? Comparisons can sometimes lead to erasure, forgetting, ignorance, and anodyne generalizations that crowd out concrete history. And at other times, comparisons can lead to critical moral reckoning, cross-cultural connections, and friendship. In trying to navigate this conundrum, I suggest we take Rosenfarb's dual goals seriously: teaching, researching, and remember the Holocaust by learning about love, i.e. solidarity and moral reckoning, and learning about language, particularity, concreteness, cultural and temporal singularity. I would like to experiment with Rosenfarb's proposal this evening by delving into just two specific terms from the Hurban Yiddish lexicon, looking at their meanings as well as the debates that they have generated, and then return to the potentially larger implications of this process. Now, given that there were at least 3,000 Hurban Yiddish words, Holocaust Yiddish words that were invented and reinvented in camps, ghettos, and in hiding, we could enter the labyrinth of this sociolect of Hurban Yiddish at many different places, and all pathways would offer us some insight onto daily life and communication for Jews during the Holocaust. In my talk today, I want to focus on the life and times of just two words, both of which generated considerable reflection during and after the war. I'll start with a real hotspot term. If they had hashtags in the 1940s and 50s, then hashtag Shabreven would be one, because this was a meme. This was a word that everybody had something to say something about. So what does it mean? Even the Yiddish speakers in the audience probably don't know what this word is, unless you've made the foolish mistake of reading my book. Nachman Blumenthal one of the prime Hurban Yiddish lexicographers, defines Shabreven in an exceptionally long gloss of 2 pages, his average was about 8 lines, which begins as follows. Taking ownerless, hefker, ownerless property, also stealing. Immediately, the word also in this definition should trouble us. How and when are taking ownerless property and stealing different acts? And if they are distinct acts on different moral planes, then why on earth are they both housed in the same word? How can a word mean both stealing and not stealing? When is it permissible to take the property of killed or deported Jews, and when is that considered a wrongful act of looting? To put this contradiction of the definition of Shabreven in context, we should first appreciate the sheer volume of Yiddish neologisms related to theft that came out of the camps and ghettos. As just a brief sample, samin, to poison, pegire, an animal carcass, matan beseser, to give in secret, a revered form of charity in the Jewish tradition, vashevin and a rein vashevin, to haul logs out of water and to pull logs into water, all now refer to some variant of stealing, smuggling, or black marketeering in Jewish camps and ghettos. We heard about klepsy from Kaplan's list, and there was also komsi komsa, which cropped up in the Flossenburg concentration camp, their version of Yiddish, and that was another way to talk about theft. So if, as the great semiotician Umberto Eco holds, dictionaries are a map of how knowledge is organized and prioritized in a given network at a given moment in time, then theft and smuggling had become the new capital city of Yiddish during the war. Not only did Yiddish speakers invent a great many words for theft during the Holocaust, they also discussed those words extensively. In their discussions, Hurban Yiddish commentators employ theft-related words as vehicles of ethical exploration, pointing toward a broader problem of language and law under genocidal conditions. If certain groups of people are legally required to be excluded from the law or abandoned by it, in Giorgio Agamben's term, how can they speak of lawful and unlawful actions within their own community? The Nazi laws of occupation essentially made it illegal for Jews to thrive or even live, as Svenja Bethke has shown with regard to ghettos, and Agamben emphasizes in the camps. Based on words they left behind, it seems as though Yiddish speakers tried to fill in this lingual, juridical gap with neologisms, almost like scratching a verbal itch to replace a law that doesn't exist or can't exist. Now back to Shabreven specifically. Other post-war glossarists, including Yisrael Kaplan, also grapple with the hazy duality that the term presents. The specific nuances of each gloss are less significant than the intricacy and passion with which each writer commits to the task of illuminating this same word. What's more, people living in the Warsaw Ghetto were also fascinated by Shabreven, examining, dissecting, and debating it even as they used it. One document from the underground archive of Emanuel Ringelblum is entitled Shabrovnikis, which means people who engage in Shabreven. It starts out with a definition. Looking worn, finished, crumpled, threadbare, and always busy. Don't waste time, you can always Shabreven something. This means grabbing things from empty houses. Below we have a few personality types. The term is then exemplified by a life story of an 18-year-old orphan named David Briner, as relayed through an anonymous interviewer, transcriber, and editor. Clearly, in the eyes of this interviewer and editor, there was a special connection between the neologism Shabrovnik and this teenager's life, since they chose to essentially weave together biography or testimony and a lexicographic gloss. Briner recounts in detail how he worked as a Shabrovnik, taking pride in the valuable items he was able to Shabrevit, and the food and even vodka he could buy as a result. And then in the midst of his bragging about how good he was at Shabreven, David Briner interjects, You're looking at me as if I've always been a Shabrovnik, a Voiler Jung, a wild child. I used to go about my business as a quiet, solid kid. Brehner's sudden belligerence could have resulted from the power dynamics of the ethnographic situation when he suddenly realized that he was being studied as a primitive, as an example of a social ill. But beyond this, Brehner's outburst seems also to relate to the dynamics of the word Shabreven itself. For Brehner, the word signifies the gap between who he was before the war and who he is now, how he sees his own character and how people see him from the outside. The word helps him tell his story, to present his hard-earned survival skills, but the term also embarrasses him. Strikingly, this 18-year-old boy was not alone in telling his story individually, collectively, through the term Shabreven in the Warsaw Ghetto. The Yiddish journalist and writer Peretz Opochinski inserted an essay of 6 handwritten pages entitled Shabreven into his diary in the summer of 1942. Now let's just recall summer of 1942 in the Warsaw Ghetto. This is just after the Great Deportation, in which around 265,000 Jews were deported from the ghetto and 35,000 killed. And Opochinski has filled 5 notebooks describing these horrors in a chronological order. And then as soon as he has a pause in this critical chronicling of the Great Deportation, and he wants to witness this state of crisis in a broader conceptual way, the word enables him to do that. And he sits down and writes a 6-page essay. He writes, the words Tishkach and Shabreven belong to that special post-expulsion vocabulary that contains the essence of our current economic existence. The other term that appears in this discussion, Tishkach, is the object of Shabreven, that is, the clothes or rags that were typically taken or looted. The fact that Opochinski defines one Holocaust Yiddish neologism through another exemplifies how interconnected these terms were, that Hurban Yiddish comprised a new system of meaning rather than just isolated additions. Advancing beyond the simple semantic meaning of the term, Opochinski also explores how people felt when they used it, what it felt like to utter this word, this bizarre, paradoxical word that does mean stealing, but it doesn't mean stealing, how people behaved with this word. To back up one. Most of the time, he writes, the Shabrovnikis themselves are the ones who use this term in order to cover up their supposed shame. At first, people said geneve, genovim, which are simple Yiddish words for theft, thieves. But maybe those who shouted thieves felt themselves accused by the term. They too took things from houses and would never want to bear the title thief, or they simply recognized that it's nonsense to call it theft when you take something that's ownerless. So, Opochinski sees that the word is used to both describe a new reality and to cover up that new reality. It is at once a manipulation to call theft Shabreven, and it is also nonsense to do otherwise. In a sense, what Opochinski implies here is that one had to speak euphemistically in order to participate in conversations in this moment of extreme desperation in the ghetto, especially regarding property, ownership, and law. Lacking any stable framework of judgment, words that described theft and non-theft could only refer to one another in an endless loop. And then he goes on to give a really fantastic metaphor for what it felt like to speak this word, to utter this word, and maybe in general to speak Yiddish at this moment in the ghetto. People are using the word every which way, whether they need to or not. They roll it and they drop it. They play around with it in this manner like children playing with a ball, throwing it in the air. Opochinski's gloss of Shabreven is an exploration of his present moment and that feeling of meaning on the move, words and ethical codes bouncing around like a rubber ball. At the same time, through this word, Opochinski is also grappling with how he and his community might or might not connect to future generations like our own. He writes, one could say that these terms shine a spotlight on our current way of life, Tishkach and Shabreven. These expressions will enter the Yiddish language as a paradigmatic sign of this period, as cornerstones of the ghetto mentality. Opochinski hopes that some of this ethical and semantic motion, words and codes bouncing around constantly, which are all archived within the word Shabreven, will be passed on to future generations, that people after the war will look back and remember not only physical and psychic torment, and not only heroism, but also the sensation of speech, the sensation of meaning on the run. Opochinski's wish for people to recall the word Shabreven in the future was also a wish to be remembered as a fully cultured person with a language and identity, a religion that at times he rejected and times he embraced, a past and a present context, rather than just a body that expired in 1942, as he did. Warsaw Ghetto prisoners were passionate in their debates about the etymology of Shabreven, especially regarding the potential interlingual influences, and some proposed that it came from German, Schaben, to scrape. Others were entirely certain that Shabreven came from Hebrew, shavar, the root that means both to break and to procure, while others insisted that it came from shaber, Polish for small bricks or tiles. I don't have time to discuss these debates in this lecture, but according to my research, I found that all of these roots had an influence on the term, that they were all collected and accumulated into the meaning of this ghetto term, and it has a wide geographic history. That's for another time. Shabreven, both the term and the practice, constituted an obsession in the Warsaw Ghetto. Like I said, hashtag. But language never stood still under these conditions of extreme depravity and torment, and new terms for theft seemed to emerge at breakneck speed. There was the well-known term organisieren, which literally meant to organize, but came to mean a wide variety of acts of theft and smuggling, as well as strange and seemingly random turns of phrase, such as parachutevin, to parachute, labern die druske, labern, which mostly meant to jabber or chit-chat in pre-war Yiddish, and druska, salt in Lithuanian. So yes, chatting up the salt was an idiom for stealing. Or take the development in the Lodz Ghetto that the writer Josef Zelkovich notes that the word biegeln, apparently taken from a German word denoting the tip of a tram car, came to mean stealing wood from a tram car. That term somehow got old and was then switched out for the phrase challah nemen, to take challah, or to pull off a piece of challah dough while baking as a ritual sacrifice. And that was in turn replaced through one small consonant jump from lamed to nun, L to N, from chale to Khanele, my name. The woman's name Khanele, which came to mean indeed stolen wooden scraps in the Lodz Ghetto. Thus we arrive at the second of our two key terms for this evening. This is the definition of the word Khanele or Khanele from the Lodz Ghetto Encyclopedia. And it's fairly close to the definition that I just shared with you now. And they add another story here, which is that working there was a master craftsman who specifically cut out wood, packed it, and handed it to his wife as she brought him lunch. One day she was caught in the act of pilfering, and he screamed, "Chane, what have they done with you?" And so Chana came to mean purloined wood. So all these different stories, and then the etymologies that I just presented you. The term is overloaded with stories. And if we look at this gloss from the Lodz Ghetto Encyclopedia, it seems to be more than utilitarian. The glossarist here is not just giving us the bare bones meaning of the term so that we could decode a document from the ghetto in basic terms. There does seem to be an element of pleasure here in storytelling. that he's taking pride, he's enjoying the lexicographic process as a source of creativity and cultural connection. Making things more interesting, Chava Rosenfarb, the author I discussed at the beginning, offers an alternate etymology in her great 2,000-page epic novel of the Lodz Ghetto, The Tree of Life, Der Baum von Leben. She discusses the word as part of a quotidian workplace scene in which a group of workers are unloading dismantled furniture from an electric car. As a matter of course, when their overseer steps out, these workers begin to smuggle wooden scraps out of the workspace for their own private use. And then her narrative turns into a gloss. Khanele, the sub-managers themselves had invented the term. When they looked at the old furniture pieces that were brought over to be processed, in the drawers of which they often found Yiddish newspapers, sidurim, prayer books, machzorim, holiday liturgy, letters and photographs, they often imagined the women who used to polish and take care of these drawers. And every time before they took them, the smugglers would say with heartache, just look at those rivkelech, the Khanelech. Rosenfarb depicts modest containers, wooden drawers, as having once been vessels of hallowed Jewish texts of different sorts. Traditional Jewish prayer books, Yiddish newspapers, which had served as a secular Bible for modern East European civilization, as well as personal writing, an informal channel of intergenerational exchange. All of these types of textual vitality comprise the lost contents of the drawers. These wooden vessels cast a new light on the titular motif of the book, the tree of life, which is both a liturgical metaphor for the Torah as well as a natural reference to a tree that remains standing in the ghetto. The tree of life as a sacral metaphor and as natural material, wood, has been transmuted into these drawers. If that is the case, if these drawers are made of holy wood, then the women who cared for this furniture before the war are now redefined as wardens of memory that is both holy and organic, spiritual and physical. The housewives are now kohaniyot, priests, or archive builders of the most important sort. And once these drawers are crushed, reduced to scraps in the ghetto, then smuggled away and burnt as firewood, all that remains of these sacred wooden archives built of sacred wood is the word for them, Khanele. And the idea of Hurban Yiddish words as archives can apply to other terms as well. And I actually found some backup for Chava Rosenfarb's definition of the term in Shlomo Frank's Diary of the Lodz Ghetto. On the whole, Rosenfarb combines chronicle and imagination to challenge us to go back to the past and uplift people who were on the margins, and teaches us that no matter how well we think we understand a given event like the Holocaust, there are always people we haven't seen or recognized yet, like the Jewish women who tended to the home furnishings and belongings and whose hands shaped history through this unglamorous work. Her etymology of Khanele also demonstrates that no matter how much has been lost and forgotten, one can always use whatever scraps we have left of objects, of knowledge, of language, of images, of literature, and turn those into rich containers of human memory, if there is will and patience to sift through the details. To conclude, I would like to return to Rosenfarb's seemingly paradoxical proposal from her 1946 essay that we generate love, that abstract, transcendent value of compassion and humanity, by studying Holocaust Yiddish, a most concrete, particular, culturally embedded, quirky, and even sometimes untranslatable aspect of Holocaust experience. Now that we've experimented with her technique and delved into the biographies of two Hurban Yiddish words, we can now ask, what might be the larger ethical value of this work? And what kinds of comparative modes might it enable? Was Rosenfarb right about connecting love and language? As one potential answer, we might consider how the study of Hurban Yiddish, like other cultural histories of the Holocaust, constitute an act of love, even and especially when they seem like non-utilitarian and inefficient ways to discover the past. We can recall that Giorgio Agamben warned that violent and genocidal regimes can reduce people to bare life, homo sacer, biological beings with no personality, rights, or identity. It is clear to me that one of the reasons that Rosenfarb and others were so passionate about the study and elevation of Hurban Yiddish was that they did not want to survive or be remembered merely as bare life, but as dignified people with complex, quirky, beautiful, and sometimes bizarre ways of describing the world. That is why Kaplan, before he could even digest food, called out to other sickly survivors to collect Hurban Yiddish words. And that is also why Peretz Opochinski paused his chronicle of the dramatic expulsion and death in the Warsaw Ghetto to write a 6-page essay about one word. It is true that learning the ins and outs of terms like Shabreven or Khanele does not expediently improve our knowledge of how many victims were killed in the Holocaust or by whom. However, when we visit the cultural meaning worlds that these words came from, we are extending the act of resistance that their speakers initiated. We are allowing them the dignity of being fully human and turning their legacy into, as Rosenfarb termed it, a new shared estate, a new cultural commons open to all. As surprising as it may sound, I also have come to believe that studying Holocaust language can enable an especially meaningful and mutually dignifying mode of comparison. I've come to this conclusion inductively, through some firsthand experiences. As I've had the opportunity to offer public lectures on Hurban Yiddish, I've had quite a number of people contact me to share that such atrocity languages have also been generated in other very different historical junctures. For instance, a scholar from Myanmar named Sid Nyang shared with me that he is in the process now of creating a, quote, glossary of politics, conflicts, and peace in Burma, Myanmar, a project that bears important parallels to the Hurban Yiddish dictionaries produced after World War II. Two of the entries that Dr. Nyang shared with me included, and my pronunciation of Burmese slang is not good, so I'm doing my best. So one is pian li pian, cutting foods, when you use 4 cuts, cutting food, funds, intelligence, and new recruits off for the enemies, the 4-cut strategy used by the Myanmar military in fighting against ethnic rebels and other resistance groups. The content of this word reminds me of how the Nazis withheld food and firewood as a mode of extermination, as reflected in the term Khanele from the Lodz ghetto. One seemingly important difference between these two cases, though, is that the Myanmar military used 4 cuts, pian li pian, at least ostensibly to punish resistance groups, at least ostensibly, whereas the Nazis made no pretense of targeting only rebels and openly blocked food and resources to all Jews and other groups deemed unworthy of life. As a second term from Dr. Nyang's glossary that reminded me of Hurban Yiddish is jarpian, and he defines it as the now notorious Chinese mob-run scam centers along the Thai-Burma border, Cambodian Thai border, and now spreading across other parts of Myanmar and Southeast Asia. These are places where Burmese juntas traffic thousands of people and force them into international cyber scams. And these have been in the news under a different name. And in this term, I once again hear echoes of Hurban Yiddish and its preponderance of words for stealing and scamming, as well as the integration of outside languages when coining these new terms. But as a point of difference, Jarpian shows how atrocities today can also incorporate the global cyberscape, something that did not exist in the Holocaust era. Or in another instance, linguist Lisa Green of UMass heard about Hurban Yiddish and pointed me towards a corpus of terms that enslaved black people coined in America between the 16th and 18th centuries. Some of those words included pan-toting, taking the material goods of the employer, such as food or clothing, for the domestic worker's own use, sometimes with the employer's permission, sometimes without. So just like in the Hurban Yiddish word Shabreven, pan-toting could mean both receiving something through legal, legitimate means as well as stealing. And both terms also question the very notion of law or legality in a context when certain human beings are deemed illegal or subhuman. Pan-toting also relates to the term Khanele, at least as Chava Rosenfarb presents it, and then it refers to domestic workers and helps us shine a light on women and their often invisible labor and work of survival. Mojo, originally a magic charm, by extension a source of personal magic that one can tap into, enabling you to work magic on something or to put someone under your spell, derived from Moko, literally medicine man, in the Fula language of West Africa. There's again a commonality with the lingual mixing found in Hurban Yiddish, where there's Polish, German, Hungarian, sometimes even Roma in Hurban Yiddish, and here it's Fula with English. But as a point of difference, Mojo was popularized by American blues singers and then integrated into mainstream American English. The chances are somebody in this room has used the term or heard the term today. It's that popular. By contrast, the vast majority of Hurban Yiddish words have fallen completely out of use since the Holocaust, since Yiddish itself declined so drastically. So here we see difference and commonality. In both cases, there's an act of erasure. The history of the word mojo and its relation to slavery has been erased, but the word is in use, whereas with Hurban Yiddish, the words themselves have mostly been forgotten, except by the glossarists and by me. So in sum, there's ample common ground among these three lexica: words from Burma, Myanmar, words from American slavery, and Hurban Yiddish. In all three languages of power work their way into the speech of the disempowered. In all three, we see heartbreaking yet resourceful ways that victims use humor to regain a sense of self. But these comparisons also allow us to acknowledge and appreciate points of divergence and distinction. In sum, the study of atrocity language leads to an encounter that is not about rivalry or forced uniformity, but instead paves the way for empathy and curiosity across difference. Approaching comparison from a place of particularity allows us the humility to accept that one group's story will never represent victimhood as a whole, that Holocaust survivors or any kind of atrocity survivors are and were humans embedded in a specific time, place, chain of events, and lexicon rather than all-knowing prophets. I believe that this humility enables more cross-cultural connections, not fewer. Cultural or language history is also an approach that does not seek to bring traumatic pasts together by insisting on seeing only a lowest common denominator, assuming that communities or scholars of other backgrounds will only absorb the most metaphorized or universalized versions of Holocaust narratives. On the contrary, diving into the lexica of destruction recognizes that people of different ethnic backgrounds are fully capable of learning and appreciating the texture and nuances of someone else's legacy. Perhaps we could call this approach to memory plurality through particularity. This is, in essence, what I believe Rosenfarb meant when she wrote of teaching love by teaching ghetto and camp language. And this is a sentiment that I believe could serve us in today's fraught world of Holocaust remembrance. Thank you.
So I'm going to invite Hannah to come over and sit with me for a few minutes. Please, if you have questions, write them on your little cards. I already wrote some on mine. Pass them to the edges where we have some staff who can pull them up to me, and I think we probably have time for about 10 minutes of questions. And while you're passing and writing, I'm going to ask my questions. Okay, does yours work?
Yes.
Okay.
I said that before I checked. Leap of faith.
So your talk has so many beautiful and thought-provoking parts, and I'm just going to jump in on some of them. One of the things I get from your talk is how language and experience are so inextricably linked, that people living in these situations of deprivation had to find words to express things that normal language wouldn't allow them to express, like ethical problems. And I wondered about what happened after, because you talk a lot about 1946 and shortly after, and the desire to capture this experience. But I know just from other stories that we've heard on this stage how some of the concerns of the immediate post-war just didn't last that long. It was too hard to communicate. And so I wanted to ask you about the survival of Hurban Yiddish. Yeah. Does this survive even among Yiddish speakers? Do such words with the reality that they capture actually, remain intelligible beyond, as you said, yourself and now all of us?
Thank you. I think that discussing the memory chain or what happened to these words after the war, it's a very painful topic, because I don't think that it was just a process of natural disappearance. There, as you saw, there were massive documentation efforts for these words. Hurban Yiddish word lists, glossaries, call them what you want, they were almost like a popular genre in the DP camps. And in general, dictionaries and lexicons were in the mid 20th century something that people wrote a lot of. People were very connected to words at that point in history and lived and saw themselves through words in a way that we don't necessarily do today. And the response was very strong to these initial efforts. They got reviewed. People were excited about them. And then I really see their disappearance. There is just, these words are really painful. We don't want to use them anymore. But there were actual, you're a historian, so archives and newspapers allow us to see cultural leaders actually saying, no, don't use these words anymore. So Yankov Zerubbabel from Palestine and from Israel, he comes to the DP camps and he comes to visit Poland, and he listens to the way that the survivors are speaking, and he goes, ew, stop this. And he writes an essay about a different Hurban Yiddish word, katzetler, camp inmates, and he says, this word, these people love this word. They're like addicted to this word to describe themselves. They're proud of it. I get it, let the victims speak in their own language, but there's a problem here. The word is ugly. And he blasted the use of Shabreven. He had a whole chapter in his book about this word and how this word represented the absolute decline of Jewish culture in Europe. And you see different, and then, Yad Vashem wasn't, now they are, but they weren't interested in these words when both Blumenthal and Kaplan moved to Israel, and their research on these words was not supported at all. So, and then newspaper editors didn't print these words. So there is being busy with life and wanting to move away from painful memories. True, I'm not denying that, but there's also a top-down effort to forget these words, because Hurban Yiddish was the Yiddish of Yiddish after the Holocaust. If Yiddish was embarrassing and lowly and vulgar, considered, it wasn't actually, and it was connected to weakness and victimhood, then Hurban Yiddish was, all of those qualities, even for Yiddish speakers. So really the efforts were quite pointed to put these aside. So it's very transgressive to keep going with this.
The Yiddish of Yiddish, yes. Hurban Yiddish. Then, therefore, I want to ask you a question that came up from the audience is about, it says, I understand that at Auschwitz, the inhabitants of the camp named warehouses that stored the goods taken off the deceased, Canada. I think many of us in this room know that slang term from Auschwitz. And the question is, are there other words from other camps that are similar to this? And I wanted to just add on a question of my own, which is like, how do you make sense of the Hurban Yiddish words that do survive? Like, we know about the term Canada, we know about the term Musulman. Which terms survive and which terms become too shameful to survive?
I don't think there's an algorithm for that, that second question. I think that so a couple of things. Oh, I lost my mic. There, it's back, right? So there's, like, if you can envision with me for a sec, I know it's a little late, but if you can envision a Venn diagram, remember when Kamala Harris said that she loved Venn diagrams? So envision the Venn diagram, right? So there's Hurban Yiddish as one atrocity sociolect that comes out of the Holocaust, and there are others. And then there's this camp Creole, which scholars have called, and people living at the time have called Lagersprache, which is like a combination, even the word is like Slavicized German, right? And that people consider a translingual Creole. It doesn't mean that the Hurban Yiddish didn't exist, but there was also this translingual Creole, which had Hungarian and Roma and German, and everybody used these words, and they could, put it into whatever grammar of whatever language was their home language and so forth. So those two, sociolects of the Holocaust, they have, now we get to the Venn diagram part, they have this overlapping segment in the middle. And I think that those are the words that are remembered the most, like Musulman and Canada, organisieren, people, and so forth. I'm sorry, it's a lot of, I hoped to teach you all of Hurban Yiddish by the end of the night, but, there's only so much. So that's my guess. I have to check it. There's a lot more work to do out there. If somebody wants to do more work on this, there's a lot more to do, especially quantitative analysis. I just scratched the surface with that stuff. There's a lot more. The question about, there's so many words from camps that are similar to, hundreds, thousands. So whoever asked me, thank you. Maybe I can share more during the cocktail time, but there are more.
Thank you. It really does open up not just experience, but then post-war experience. And I just love hearing you talk about it. Can you tell us more about who invented the new Yiddish terms? Do we know their names? Were they young? Were they old? Were they writers? Who? You've given us some of them.
Well, those are the people who documented or uplifted these terms. But language is always in motion, right? We use, there are a bunch of articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post about all the new words that were coming into use in the first few months of the Trump presidency, and how different words were changing in meaning. During the COVID pandemic, suddenly we have super spreader and, Zooming and all. So language is constantly in motion. When there's, in normal times or semi-normal times, in an event of extremity like the Holocaust, and World War I also produced a lot of new words, and British soldiers were really interested in those new words. So anytime there's a war, something extreme, there's an influx, because reality is changing and meanings feel unstable, and people, they can either not have a word to describe an object that just didn't exist before, or it's that they have the word, but it just somehow doesn't feel right anymore, so they have to use a new one. So the thing I love about language history is that it's studying collective history. There's no single author to a single word. There can't be. If I just say now, guess what? A chair is called Tom. Nobody's going to use that. It has to. So each word contains hundreds of conversations. Each word contains the stories of thousands of people who spoke that word. So when you go into just one word and you start to unpack it, you get so much collective experience and difference. It's not essentialized, because you see people debate what the word was for, if it was good, if it was not. I'm going to use it, I'm not going to use it. So I'm sorry that I can't name a single author, but I have to say that's one of the things that I love about this kind of work, is that there is no single author.
Yeah, the 6-line definition.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking at the clock. We're supposed to be done in 2 minutes. Okay, so
Ooh,
one
sorry.
more.
Okay,
no,
I'll
no,
answer
we're
much
good.
more
No,
briefly.
no, I love your
I'm
answers.
excited. Okay.
Did you find differences in how Yiddish speakers from different ideological or religious observance levels used these words? Can you tell anything about, we know that these communities were so fractured and people were in different sub-communities.
Yeah, yes. I think that geography played a really important role. Remember, starting with ghettoization, sub-communities that existed in a semi-stable or comprehensible form in the interwar years were all shuffled, right? Yeah. So in in any ghetto, there's going to be somebody who is extremely educated, who's living with or selling potatoes next to a gangster. That's part of what this language change is about, is the shuffling of those categories.
Just to end, I'm going to pull one of these questions and turn it into a concluding statement.
Can I have those cards later?
Absolutely, yeah, they're great. The question is, how do you describe your field or discipline? Are you a historian, a linguist, an etymologist, or an anthropologist? And I'm going to say, I think you're a little bit of all of these, and that's what's so exciting about this work.
Yeah, thank you. I've been told lots of times, my PhD's in history, my BA's in literature. I've been teaching in a literature department for 7 years, and now I'm in a history department. So it's like a strange quirk and fault of mine, because early on people said to me, you do good work, but you really have to be more clear about what discipline you belong to, because you're just never going to get a job and you're never going to get published in this, multidisciplinary mode. And I said, that sounds extremely sound, but anything that somebody tells me to do, I end up doing the opposite. So yeah, I think I say that I draw from all of these. I'm not a linguist. That's one thing I know I'm not. They do much more technical work that I don't know how to do with numbers and things like that. I respect them, I read them, but I don't have those skills. So, it's not that interesting, what I am. Just the words are cool, yeah.
Pollin-Galay, I want to thank you for being with us tonight, and I want to thank all of you for coming out and ask you to join us upstairs for a little celebration of the Weinman's 30th anniversary. Thank you.
Thank you so much.